Hey! So you've been threatened with this, and it's happening again. If anyone remembers 2 or 3 years, no, probably a bit before COVID, actually, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I did about 4 or 5 talks in a row because no one else would volunteer. Like, nobody wants that again. I'm sure our membership took a huge dip based on that, so please volunteer for talks rather than listening to me. So I'm going to talk to you about Spring 23 for developers. Anybody see a problem with this image as to why Cody, I don't know, I wouldn't look at Cody and think that's a developer. Exactly. He's reading the manual. Like, we developers don't do that. We just start building stuff, and only when it all goes horribly wrong.
He's sitting on a waterfall.
Well, there you go. For what?
Like, that's not... Yeah.
Best we don't go into that, I would say. Who knows what's happened there. But anyway, moving on. First thing in Spring 23, LWC references. So one of the things that's always been a challenge, going back to Visualforce, actually, for those that have been around for a while, is how to identify elements on a page. And in Lightning Web Components, we've got something borrowed, I think, from Vue.js, which is the concept of a reference. And this is where you have an attribute on an element of LWC ref, and you give it a string. And based on that string, you can then do this.refs.name of string, and you get the HTML element. No need to use selectors. No need to go wandering off over the DOM. That's all pre-built for you. You can just jump straight in and do it. Very cool. Very popular in Vue.js. Sadly, string literals only, so you can't dynamically generate names, so you can't use it in an iterator. Not only does it not work in a for each or an iterator, if you try and do it, for once, I think Salesforce have got this right, it won't actually save now, it won't deploy. Whereas before you used to be able to deploy it and then it wouldn't work. So it's much nicer, but it tells you immediately you can't do this. I'm very hopeful that this is coming because, again, Vue.js, you can do this. I suspect, really hope, this is just like the first iteration that we're seeing. The other thing that I think is great is that you can have multiple elements with the same reference in it. So I can use user info twice, and that one will win because it was the last one that it came across. Awesome. So they snatched defeat from the jaws of victory there.
There is a workaround, though. If you are inserting your DOM from your JavaScript, you can do it with like an iteration or a count or whatever.
On using references or using data attributes?
You say you can't use dynamically generated names.
Mm-hmm.
You can if you do it in the JavaScript and then insert it into the DOM.
With the LWC? With the LWC ref? Are you sure about that?
It will be inserted as a string literal, so technically you should be able to.
You should be able to, but I think I'm going to maybe point out why that might not work in a later slide. Oh. We shall see. So why would you use it over data star attributes? First thing I think that's really important is clarity. If you see a data hyphen whatever attribute, you don't know what that's used for. You don't know what its purpose is. You have to go and inspect the JavaScript code. You have to go and find out what that's used for. If an LWC ref is the appropriate thing that satisfies your need, it's really clear that you are using that to provide a reference because it doesn't do anything else. The other thing, and to your point, hygiene, refs don't render in HTML. You don't have to expose that, and that can be a benefit over data star attributes. They don't appear in the rendered HTML, so you're not exposing that to somebody else, that this is there and they can rely on it. It's all kind of hidden away. And also performance. So refs is built once by the platform. It's there as soon as your JavaScript executes. You're not having to run the selectors across all objects. Of course, if you're responding to a button click or something like that, then data star attributes are probably what you want because you need to know the element that started that, and that's difficult to do based on references. Other things that we have in around LWC, conditional directives. If, else, and else if. Very pleased to see those. If true and if false, I've always been very disappointed with those. I think they're too detached from each other. To say else, I have to do if false, and then the same thing that I used if true somewhere else in the page all seemed a bit detached and a bit easy to get wrong. It's more performant, don't know why, apparently it is. That's all we need to know. And the old versions will go. So you should move to these new versions because they just look nicer as well. Another great thing about them, else if and else must be immediately preceded by if or else if, which means you have to do this. I've got my if say hello, hello world, else if say goodbye, goodbye world, else nothing to say. These can't have anything in between them. So if I try and refactor this and say, hey, I can do hello, goodbye, and then I can put world in its own thing, that will error because I've broken the coupling there. And I think that's really good because when you had things like if true, if false, it was really easy to have stuff leak out in here that you didn't really want because they were completely detached from each other. You could have them in separate parts of the pages. So again, very big fan of this. There's some nice work going on in Lightning Web Components at the moment. Please feed that back, Mike. Bob Buzzard seal of approval. User mode database operations. This is very cool. So as we all know, Apex runs in God mode, in system mode, unless it's anonymous Apex. And this allows you to apply the security of the logged in user. So it applies sharing rules regardless of your class sharing keywords rather. So if you've got without sharing, if you are running in user mode, it will apply the sharing rules regardless of what it says there. Something to watch out for. It applies field level security and object permissions. And we can retire so much code that we had to put in place to get through the security review, checking field level security and checking object permissions. You want to use this over security enforced because it handles polymorphic fields. I don't know what with security enforced didn't handle about that because I never used it. It applies to all clauses. That's very good. And it finds all errors in the query. Security enforced only returned the first. So that's wonderful. That's like the security. If anyone's been through the security review of Salesforce, that was a bit death by 1,000 cuts as well. So it's always nice to get all your errors up front rather than here's one, try again, here's one. Or deploying profiles, if anyone's ever done that. Oh, there's an error on line 1. Fix that, error on line 2. Oh, there's an error on line 3. Could have told me that. So the way you apply this is you do with. In SOCL, do with user mode. And if you're using DML, you do as user. DML as usual, but pop the add user in there as well. You can specify system mode. Given that Apex runs by default in system mode, anyone think of a reason why you'd want to specify system mode? Exactly, a word I used earlier on, clarity. You're making it very clear, this query needs to run in system mode. Don't change it. It's a bit like if you avoid putting the sharing keyword into your Apex class. What does that mean? Does that mean I forgot, or does that mean I want it to do something based on the way that the request came in? Always about clarity. If this needs to run in system mode, you don't want to run changing it, put system mode there. What's quite interesting is if you're running in anonymous Apex, which is the one place that it runs in user mode, you cannot do with system mode and elevate yourself. It will barf at that point in time and say you're not allowed to do it. So that was quite fun. Delaying in queued jobs. These are generally available. So if you're in queuing a job, and this would be really useful if you've had a job that hasn't completed and you know it's going to need a bit more time, rather than queuing it straight away, you can delay it. So you can say, fire this off in 5 minutes because it will probably be done by then. And you can, in that particular example, the (5) at the end delays the job execution by 5 minutes, and you can have a range of 0, go immediately. Why do you want to do that, I don't know. Up to 10 minutes. And you can also have an org-wide default if all of your in-queued jobs need to be held back for a few seconds for whatever reason. Still struggling to understand exactly what scenario that might be satisfying, but I guess depending on your integration estate, there may be things like that. You can define 1 to 600 seconds that everything gets that gets applied to everything, apart from if you've specified one of these. This still wins. This is the one that overrides. It doesn't override that parameter. Did that jump? No, that's all right. Bind variable map. So this is quite interesting. When I saw the bind variable map, I thought, well, that's great. It kind of binds a bunch of things in a map rather than directly into the dynamic SOCL. And there was this whole thing of like, oh no, but dynamic SOCL doesn't support binds. And it does, but it only supports primitives with local scope. So you, if you wanted to access something from another class, for example, if you wanted to get the result of a method, you couldn't bind that in. You had to store that in a local variable and then do something with it. So query with binds. And I think this is an interesting one because I think there's a little bit of smoke, not smoke and mirrors, that's the wrong term, but I think there's a little bit of kind of, it's lacking clarity in a couple of places. But anyway, I'll come on to that. So, but you can bind in fields from S-objects, results from method calls, static variables. But the thing is, to me, you're putting them in a map, you're associating them with a key, that is actually evaluated at that point in time. That's been turned into a primitive of the default account name. This isn't being bound in as a variable in exactly that way, I personally think anyway. But this is what it would look like. I create my map, I put a key, I put a value, and I can have as many of those as I want. And then I have my database query with binds. This is dynamic SOCL. And then I can refer to a key, and that will expand up into whatever I need it to. And obviously I give it access levels user mode because I want to pass the security review with this piece of code. Very important. This also handles dotted names in the query very badly. This is really entertaining. I didn't discover this, I must admit. So I have my params, I have my record ID. This is one that I did in my dev org earlier on today. That is a real record ID. I can put anything I like before .record ID, and that will take that and apply that to there. So if you want to obfuscate your code and really confuse everybody else, evil coworker type of stuff, you can definitely do that. If you put any prefix you like .record ID in here, this would then barf because it would say, I'm expecting record ID, and I've got this really long name. So yeah, that wasn't me. Scan that QR code. That will take you to the guy who wrote the Medium post where he found out all this. But I thought, I can't believe this is happening. And good Lord, it does. Again, feed that back, Mike, if you want.
I will do, no worries.
And that's it. That's Spring 23. Thank you very much.